You won't believe how ordinary it once was. Picture a lively 1960s high street, where youngsters dashed between shop fronts with the kind of carefree confidence that would make today's parents pause. Their laughter echoed off red brick terraces, mingling with the gentle hum of passing buses and the clatter of prams on the pavement. No schedules, no devices, no constant reminders to be careful, just pure freedom, carried on a breeze that smelled faintly of warm bread from the bakery and freshly printed comics from the newsagent. What seems unthinkable now was simply part of everyday life then, a world shaped by trust, familiarity, and the unwritten rules of a close community. And as we look back, these forgotten moments reveal a Britain that feels astonishingly distant, yet deeply familiar. To understand why those youthful freedoms felt so natural, you have to picture Britain as it truly was in the 1960s. A country stepping out from the shadow of post-war recovery and into a decade filled with energy, optimism, and a growing sense of possibility. Life moved at a gentler pace, shaped less by regulations and more by the quiet rhythm of everyday community. Streets were alive with people rather than cars, and neighbors didn't just live side by side, they genuinely looked out for one another. That unspoken network of trust created a safety net far stronger than any modern policy. For youngsters, independence wasn't an act of rebellion. It was simply woven into the fabric of daily life. Walking to school alone, running errands for parents, or spending entire afternoons exploring the neighborhood wasn't remarkable. It was expected. Adults knew the faces on every corner, and children learned confidence through small adventures that gradually expanded their world. When we compare it to today's structured routines and digital connections, the contrast is striking. Yet this easy freedom shaped a generation that grew up feeling capable, grounded, and deeply connected to the places they called home. What feels extraordinary now was, back then, nothing more than a normal Tuesday. Children could disappear into the neighborhood for hours, returning only when the church bells chimed or when the first streetlights blinked awake. There was an unspoken understanding. As long as you came home with muddy shoes, rosy cheeks, and a believable story, everything was fine. Parents didn't hover. They trusted the community, the routine of the day, and the simple fact that every child on the estate looked after the others. Outdoor games weren't confined to playgrounds. Streets became kingdoms, football pitches, or entire adventure maps. One moment you were chalking out hopscotch squares, and the next you were racing across a whole row of terraces in a game that somehow involved secret passwords, imaginary missions, and the neighbor's hedges. Nobody questioned it. Cars were fewer, slower, and patient. The road truly belonged to its youngest residents. Walking to school felt like a rite of passage. Come rain, fog, or a biting winter breeze, youngsters trudged along familiar routes with satchels bouncing against their sides. There were no queues of cars outside the gates, no hurried drop-offs, just groups of children, chatting, swapping stories, and learning small lessons about the world as they went. And then there were the dens, the pride of any child with enough imagination to transform a scrap of woodland into a private kingdom. Climbing trees, exploring local paths, collecting interesting stones or leaves. These simple adventures taught resilience and creativity long before anyone used those words. Today, such freedoms would spark hesitation, forms to sign, or long discussions about safety. Yet, in the 1960s, these everyday adventures shaped childhood in the most natural way possible, setting the stage for even more surprising freedoms still to come. One of the most charming parts of 1960s youth life was how confidently youngsters moved through the local high street, as if every shop and passerby belonged to a familiar extended family. Running errands alone was completely ordinary. A parent might hand over a few coins, give a brief instruction, and trust the child to return with bread, a newspaper, or a packet of novelty sweets. No one blinked an eye when a small child pushed open the heavy door of a corner shop, placed their items on the counter, and chatted politely with the shopkeeper. Beyond the essentials, children navigated the small pleasures of the era with equal confidence. They wandered into arcades, explored fairs that popped up on village greens, or spent afternoons drifting between parks, markets, and bus stops. Interacting with adults was simply part of daily life. Youngsters asked bus conductors for fares, held short conversations with neighbors, and learned the art of manners through real exchanges rather than reminders. These freedoms slowly built independence. Children learned how to handle money, speak to adults, and judge situations for themselves. They felt trusted, capable, and included in the rhythm of community life. When we compare this to today's world of structured routines, supervised activities, and digital communication, the difference is striking. Modern children may travel farther virtually, but the youngsters of the 1960s traveled farther emotionally, gaining confidence through everyday encounters. And it was these experiences, ordinary, unremarkable at the time, that formed the foundation of a generation that grew up knowing how to read a room, respect a space, and navigate the world with assurance and quiet confidence. School life in the 1960s carried its own rhythm, one that would puzzle and perhaps amuse anyone looking back today. Mornings began with a sense of order that felt almost ceremonial. Pupils lined up neatly in the playground, shoes polished, satchels in hand, waiting for the steady call to form rows. Prefects stood proudly at the front, enforcing rules with an authority that seemed far beyond their years. They were the quiet guardians of corridor behavior, ensuring shirts were tucked in and voices kept at a respectful level as the day began. Inside the classroom, routines followed a steady pattern. Desks creaked, chalk dust drifted through the air, and the soft tapping of pencils became its own soundtrack. Teachers expected attention without question, and pupils learned to read the subtle signals that meant focus now or we're changing. Activities. There was a seriousness to lessons, yet an underlying warmth in how classmates supported one another. Then came lunchtime, a glorious burst of organized chaos. The dinner hall filled with chatter, trays clattered, and children swapped portions with the kind of diplomacy only school children truly understand. Outside, the playground transformed into a world of its own. Games spread across every inch of tarmac, friendships shifted, and harmless mischief flourished. Secret clubs whispered plans, and spontaneous competitions unfolded with a freedom that felt boundless. Break time wasn't dangerous or wild, just wonderfully imaginative. Children stretched their creativity through simple games and shared moments that shaped their social skills. Looking back, these school day behaviors weren't rebellious at all. They were simply the everyday patterns of a generation learning how to navigate rules, relationships, and the lively hum of a school community that treated independence as part of growing up. What makes these old freedoms so unforgettable is how quietly they shaped the people who lived through them. What felt ordinary at the time, roaming freely, making decisions, learning through small adventures, built a kind of resilience that couldn't be taught in any formal lesson. You learned to judge your own limits, solve your own problems, and trust your instincts long before anyone used words like confidence building. These everyday moments stitched together a childhood full of independence and imagination. There's a tenderness in the memories too, the sting of cold fingertips after winter play, the comforting chatter echoing through long school corridors, the small pride of returning from an errand with exactly the right change. These details linger because they carried meaning. They were little markers of growing up, celebrated not with fanfare but with quiet recognition. Today, when life feels more structured and carefully managed, those freedoms seem almost magical. They belong to a Britain where communities felt close, days stretched endlessly, and childhood was shaped by curiosity rather than caution. And that emotional contrast is what makes these memories feel irreplaceable even decades later. Guiding us gently into the final reflections of how the world has changed. Looking at today's world, it's clear that childhood has become more structured, more supervised, and wrapped in layers of caution that would have puzzled any youngster from the 1960s. Rules are tighter, routines are planned, and independence arrives far later. Yet the memories of that earlier era remain powerful precisely because they were shaped by trust and simple freedoms. The 1960s may be gone, but the spirit of those days, the confidence, curiosity, and gentle charm of growing up in a close-knit Britain still lives in the people who experienced it. And that spirit continues to glow no matter how much the world changes. For more of these unbelievable memories, tap the video on your screen. The 1970s stories are something else. Don't forget to subscribe.